Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kishore Mahbubani. I'm the Dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this public lecture by my good friend, Professor Amitav Acharya. And I'll keep up the tradition of making 3 points. My first point will be about world order. Second point will be about Trump. And then the third point, I'll introduce the speaker. But I must say, both Amitav and I were actually very happy to see such a full house of people coming to listen to a talk on world order. It's normally a very boring subject. Everybody falls asleep whenever you start talking about world order. So it's quite interesting that there's such a big turnout. And I'm actually very relieved, because if there is one country in the world that will suffer the most if there's a breakdown in world order, it is Singapore. And the reason why it's Singapore, because there is no other country on planet Earth that is as globally interdependent as Singapore is. No, that means that somebody agreed with me. Our total trade is what, 3.5 to 4 times the size of our GNP. And in most countries it's 10%, 20%, not 350 to 400%. And given this extraordinary dependence of Singapore on a sort of a stable world order, it's quite remarkable how little Singaporeans worry about it. So I hope that by you coming for this talk, it's a good sign that now Singaporeans will get more interested in world order, and you might even want to read 1 or 2 books I have written about world order on the subject. And on the nation of books, I just want to mention that actually it's related to that world order issue. I'm coming out with a book on ASEAN on March the 8th, because I think just as Singapore needs a stable world order, Singapore also needs to have a strong ASEAN. And I'm glad that I should also mention Amitav, in addition to his many other skills, is also a global expert on ASEAN. Now, the second point is, of course, about Trump. And I can honestly say, and I was in Davos just a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. People in Davos who are among, in theory, some of the best informed people in the world, some of the most senior people in the world, and you would expect them to sort of have a very good feel of what's going to happen in the world, what's going to happen. And the people in Davos are absolutely shocked. They were shocked because Donald Trump is doing exactly what he promised to do. Now, that's not what politicians are supposed to do. Politicians are supposed to make great election promises and then gently walk away from them. And my favorite example is about how Bill Clinton, when he was running for office for president first time in 1992, one of his favorite lines that he used to beat up George H.W. Bush, Father Bush in the presidential election campaign, was he said, "Unlike President Bush, I will not coddle the butchers of Beijing." Famous line, right? And exactly 1 year later, in November 1993, I was in Blake Island, on a very small island, in a large tent with all the APEC leaders, and I saw the first meeting between President Bill Clinton and President Jiang Zemin. And I saw Bill Clinton coddle Jiang Zemin brilliantly. So that to me is what politicians are supposed to do. You're supposed to make election promises and then you walk away from them. But Trump has changed the nature of the game completely. I thought that his idea of building a wall was absolutely crazy, that he would just use it to get votes and not proceed with it. Amazingly, he's proceeding with it. And he's also insisting that Mexico pay for it. That's an absurd demand. But he still wants to do that. So we are dealing with something quite new, which is why it's good that Amitav has decided to come up and bravely address this subject and also talk about how some of these issues actually predated Trump. So with that, let me quickly introduce our distinguished speaker. Let me mention that he is the Boeing Company Chair. He holds the Boeing Company Chair in International Relations at the Schwarzman Scholars Program in Tsinghua, and I had the great pleasure of actually being invited to lecture in the program in November. And he's also a distinguished professor of international relations and the UNESCO Chair in Transnational Challenges in Governance at SAIS in the School of International Service in American University, Washington, D.C. His recent books on world order and international relations theory include The End of American World Order in 2014, Rethinking Power, Institutions and Ideas in World Politics, and he's also got a new one on Why Govern, Rethinking Demand and Progress in Global Governance is on sale outside after the talk. He was elected to the Christensen Fellowship at Oxford University, and more importantly, he's the first non-Western scholar to be elected as the president of the International Studies Association, the most respected and influential global network of scholars in international relations, and that's a really big deal. He has, of course, contributed op-eds to many newspapers, including FT, IHT, or Australian Financial Review. He's appeared on many media channels, including BBC, CNN, NPR. But most importantly, Amitav is a very old friend of Singapore. He has lived in Singapore, he has taught in Singapore. I'm sure he considers Singapore also as his home. So it's so great to welcome you back home again. Amitav, over to you.
Thank you, Kishore, for that very generous introduction. Those of you who may not know this, that Kishore cut short his visit to Bangkok. He was supposed to land around this time, but I asked him if he could come earlier because I had expected a large crowd, and I said, I can't do this myself. So I will take the easy questions and you will take the hard questions. So feel free to ask him the questions about Trump, the difficult questions. And I will give a more historical background and put Trump in context. Kishore and I have one thing in common. Both of us have been arguing quite for some time that the Western-dominated world order is in, if not mortal crisis, but it's declining. And many of his books, including the Eastern Hemisphere book, the Great Convergence book, but Can Asians Think book, he has been a consistent sort of analyst of the fact that the world order is changing, can take business as usual, and in a sense, he should be feeling vindicated. Nobody predicted Trump. The day of the election, I was supposed to write an op-ed, and I had two drafts, one on Hillary Clinton winning and one on Trump winning. And at 10 a.m. in the morning, when the results in the I was in Beijing, so I basically switched from the Clinton draft to the Trump draft. It's in the Diplomat. But I must say that I didn't have to change very much because the basic part of it was about the decline of the world order. And I didn't think Trump is going to reverse that, the decline of the American-led world order. So I will talk about the context rather than exactly what Trump will do and may not do, because we really can't predict this. He is obviously doing things which are quite extraordinary and following up some of his campaign promises, but nobody can predict what he will do in the next few months, where the world will be. So instead of predicting, we should analyze and put him in the context. And this is why the key points I'm going to make are as follows. To me, Trump is not the cause, but the consequence of a crisis and decline in the sort of existing world order, which is an American-led, American-created liberal international order. And why it is that? Because this crisis has been going, the decline has been going for some time. So to give you an example, people say that Trump's election reflects the domestic challenge to liberalism, not the external challenge. So until now, people used to think the challenge to American primacy or the American world order is from countries like China, countries like Russia or India, the rising powers. And now suddenly, and if you read the articles in Foreign Affairs, they say, oh, the crisis is actually from within, from United States, rather than from outside. But why did the crisis in domestic sphere come about? Well, if you look at the voting patterns, Hillary Clinton might have lost the election in 3 states. There were Rust Belt Midwestern states which have been most seriously affected by globalization. And why those voters are disaffected? Because many of the jobs went to China and India. So you cannot de-link the rise of Trump from the crisis that was caused by the rise of the rest, and especially the rise of Asia relative to the United States. So it's a domestic crisis for sure, a domestic challenge to liberal order, but at the same time it has something to do with what the power shift that was going on, which Kishore has written about, and my book in 2014, End of American World Order, had also discussed quite extensively. So if you want, if you're in doubt, you can pick up an order form. The book, some display copies are there, but you can read. And apparently I was told by my publisher that in December there was a huge surge of sales and ordering of the book. And I have an article in the Financial Times just 10 days ago, which basically FT would never publish me otherwise, although in the past they did, but they felt that some of these things were already been told, nobody predicted, but anticipated. So Trump is therefore the consequence, not the cause. This is different from what you may hear. That order that he is trying to destroy now actually was already in decline. In fact, you can find many examples of that. World trade, the volume of increase in the rate of increase in world trade has slowed down 4 years ago. It might slow down even more, but this trade regime was in crisis. That's part of the liberal order. International institutions that are associated with US dominance, like the World Bank, WTO, IMF, they're all under some sort of fragmentation, if not total decay. And my other book, Why Govern, charts the fragmentation of global governance, the architecture which was created and maintained by the United States. The expansion of democracy, which is another element of the liberal order, had peaked in 2000, and there were a lot of democracy reversals. So whether you talk about interdependence, institutions, or democracy, the 3 pillars of liberal order were already in decline for some time. So what Trump might do, and this is where the irony is, Trump says he can make America great again. Okay, what does that mean is, to me, that he will try to revive America's own national strength. And he may be able to do that, because basically Obama had done the job for him. The US economy is doing very well. I think it's a misnomer to say that Trump will make America great again, because America is already great. And Obama had revived the economy and put it in a pretty good shape. What Trump might do, even if he increases America's national strength, in so doing, he'll destroy the American-led liberal order, because that's what basically his platform is about. So dismantle, reject the TPP, have trade sanctions threatened against China, basically take a very different attitude, more nationalistic, inward-looking approach to economic globalization, threatening US alliances, which are part of the liberal order, NATO included, also bilateral alliances with South Korea and Japan. So he's challenging all the elements of the liberal order, and while talking about making America great again. So if you are a liberal, you would say that the reason America is great or has been great is not because of his own national strength, but also it was the leader of a world order that it built, created, and maintained. So Trump is saying that we can separate the two. So we can make America great again, but in the process, we don't need these elements of the liberal order. Now, this is the big problem for American liberals, because they have never seen this coming, and they haven't found a way to respond to this. So that was my second point, and the point is that Trump will never be able to revive US global hegemony. He will probably he can rebuild America's strength, basically military, because the US economy is doing pretty well. But that's not the same as reviving American global hegemony, which is basically America is number one in both hard power and soft power. In fact, he will damage that. And there's a typo there. It's US built and led world order. I thought we corrected that, but didn't work. Okay. My third point is, what about the rising powers or emerging powers? Countries like China, countries like India, Brazil, South Africa, and also countries like Turkey, Indonesia, the larger group of what we call emerging powers. Now, they are actually would be in a great position to take more share of the global leadership, and they will try, and China in particular. But the problem is that they also face problems. So for the last 5 years or so, the growth rates of the BRICS have declined, except China. Well, in China also it has declined, except India, which has maintained a steady growth. South Africa, Brazil is in almost recession. South Africa is also in a virtual economic recession and stagnation. Russia economically is also in a mess because of the sanctions over Crimea. So the emerging powers, and the Goldman Sachs actually closed down the emerging markets fund, the BRICS fund, a couple of years ago because the fund was losing money. But that's not the only issue. Countries like India and China will continue to grow, but the BRICS are also divided, especially the two most important BRIC countries, China and India. They have a lot of interest in common globally, but they, at the regional level, they compete. In the last year, we have seen China basically not only opposing any Indian aspiration to get into the nuclear suppliers group, refusing to designate a terrorist that India considers terrorist as a terrorist by the UN Security Council. And also, while India and China cooperate in the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, where India is the second largest shareholder, India is dead opposed to the OBOR, Belt and Road, because China has, there is a China-Pakistan corridor element that goes to the disputed territory, Kashmir territory, that India claims. So the BRICS are in a weak position, and India and China, which if they were really unified, they could actually make a big difference. And they could actually take advantage of this situation, but they're not in that situation. However, having said that, they still can make a lot of difference. And that difference is not in destroying the liberal order, but actually defending it. And this is the other irony. Not long ago, last year, people used to think the biggest challenge to the liberal order is illiberal countries like China. Today, China is seen as the savior of the liberal order, because as Xi Jinping went to Davos and Geneva, made a couple of speeches where he defended globalization. And that's another interesting thing, irony, that the countries that were supposed to destroy the liberal order are actually defending it. The countries that were supposed to defend the liberal order, United States and Britain, are actually damaging it. Britain with Brexit, for example, and United States with Trump. So we are in a very, very odd situation. And this is really a turning point in the history of world order. And that brings me to the next point about globalization. And there is a lot of, and Kishore goes to Davos, I don't, but I was in Beijing, and we have a lot of discussion about the future of globalization. And from the West, you would see globalization is going to be reversed, or it's the end of globalization. Globalization is part of the liberal world order as well. And my reaction, especially when I was talking around in Beijing, is to say that globalization is not going to be dead. It will be different. And it will be different, it's already being different. So it will be taking a new form. It will be led more by the East than the West, based more on South-South than North-South linkages, and focusing more on development than trade. Now I want to show you some data to make that point. So let's start with this. This is a chart of a world's power shift from 1700 to 2000. Year 2000. Globalization was always led by the East. So only in the last, from about, it was not until the 19th century that China ceased being the #1 economy. And if you really look at the history of globalization, it's the Islamic, the Arabs basically invented globalization because they're the first one to create, we talk about the Silk Road, but the Arabs are the first one to create a supply chain and a trade chain from Spain, which was under Arab rule for several hundred years, to Indonesia. And that was really the origins of globalization, and even Western historians will give credit that. But it was China and India, the largest two economies in the world, which basically drove what is called Oriental globalization. I don't want to go into history, but in a sense, the period of Western dominance in the world has been relatively brief in the larger scheme. The world has 5,000 years of history. The West has been dominant only for 400 years. And within that 400 years, even then, China was still the #1 economy. So this will tell you one aspect of it. So don't be surprised. This is not historically unprecedented that East will lead globalization. I want to show you this. I meant the point that globalization will be led by South-South trade. Now this is interesting because you can see that the North-North trade, like trade among the developing countries, was here in 1980. Today, it's here. The trade, South-South trade among the developing countries was here, and this is going to be, it is now almost matching North-North trade. And the North-South trade is pretty kind of level. So if you ask about the future of globalization, I would say this lies in this line, South-South trade. The China, Africa, India, Africa, China, India, China, Southeast Asia, rather than the traditional West and the South, so West and Africa or West and Asia trade. There's also investment. You can find this. You can see that China's outward investment. Sorry, this is the infrastructure. I don't have the investment data. China's investment in infrastructure. This is the point I was trying to make, that we talk about globalization most in terms of trade, but not in terms of development. When we have a different focus in globalization, we are moving away from trade to development, and infrastructure is a big part of the development. So you can see that China and India are the biggest spenders of infrastructure, and compared to the Western countries. By the way, the investment data, which I had it, but we had a problem with my PowerPoints, so we lost that. No, wait a minute. Yeah. The investment statistics are the same. China is the largest provider of outbound investment today. And the investment flow from the developing countries, Asia is the largest single block of outbound investment today. Asian countries, including Hong Kong, Taiwan, China, India, Singapore. Actually, among the Singapore invested something like $40 billion in the last 5 years. I had the data, I'm sorry, I lost that. But whether you look at trade or foreign direct investment, the so-called South, or the countries of the developing countries, are actually leading, they're replacing the West. So that's a form of globalization. So if you look at globalization in terms of so the data, I'm just afraid that I lost the real slides. Yes, I think we don't have the slides that I actually had. Future of globalization, here it is. This is my view. It will be led by the East, so it's kind of back to the future. And I'm slightly exaggerating, but not that much. Especially China and India, more on South-South linkages, because the trade and investment patterns speak to the rise of South-South as opposed to North-South linkages. Less conditionality, like what you saw in IMF or lending, that you have to have this reform, that reform, and more respect for state sovereignty, which may or may not be a good thing. But it's a broader agenda, focusing on development infrastructure rather than trade. And I dare say that it will be less coercive, not necessarily peaceful. And globalization has always been backed by Western colonialism, right from the time it started. Even in the 20th century, many examples of intervention by Western countries to protect the investments and interests. I'm not saying countries like China and India will not, their investments and their approach to globalization will be free from conflicts, but it will be much less. There will be more respect for state sovereignty because these countries are relatively newcomers and they have greater respect for sovereignty than others. And also cultural and political diversity. There will be more respect. It's no end of history that everybody has to be liberal, democratic, or capitalist in a particular way. There will be capitalism, of course, generally is happening, but capitalism is a very broad form. So there's a huge difference between the state-led capitalism of East Asia and capitalism that we find in the United States. And also, that's different from the capitalism of Europe. So we'll have diversity in economic ideology, we have diversity in political ideology, and that's the kind of globalization we'll see. Rather than calling it end of globalization, we will see the end of the traditional liberal Western-led globalization. And that's the world order we can look at, or I think will happen. This is a chart from KPMG group that tells you also where the power shift is happening. So this is very interesting. When you talk about the global power shift, don't pay all the attention to the BRICS or the so-called emerging markets. There are a lot of other countries that are also rising. So what we see is the rise of the rest rather than rise of the BRICS. So developing countries will account for 57% of the world's GDP. This is according to Future State 2030 report by KPMG Group. India and China, 25%. This is, by the way, very conservative. You can find statistics will say they will go up to between 2030 and 2050, close to 50%. So some of that data is in my book. And urbanization, and here also you see 37% of the global trade. This is also conservative, but still much more than, they used to be like 10% 20 years ago in share of global trade. So Trump comes into office in the midst of these changes that are happening. Okay, so in that sense, that's why I say he's the consequence rather than the cause. So what he might do though, by the way, I wanted to also tell you a little bit about how the US-China share of global GDP has changed. In 2001, US had 32% or 0.1% and China had 4%. So US share was 7.9% times that of China. In 2014, the US had 22.3%, China had 13.4%. So US share was only 1.7 times that of China. And if you look at the future, and some people have already argued that China had already overtaken the US in purchasing power terms in GDP. So a very dramatic shift. The EU Institute of Security Studies, its 2030 report, talks about who are the 5 largest economies in the world in terms of share of global GDP. So China actually leads the US, and EU and India is there. But if you look at this chart, this is a projection also coming from PricewaterhouseCoopers. And I just says all this data have problems, okay? Don't take this as the last word. But I have, and it's my hobby to collect data like this and compare them and make a best assessment. So I think the PricewaterhouseCoopers data is actually quite credible because it compares with a lot of other data from the US National Intelligence Council, the European Union, OECD. So it talks about the relative positions of China and India and the 10 countries in terms of top 10 economies in 2050, a little later. So China, India, United States, Indonesia, Brazil, Mexico, Japan, Russia, Nigeria, and Germany. So you can see that countries which are outside of the traditional definition of the West are actually going to do pretty well. So what Trump might do to this is can aggravate this. So first of all, he doesn't recognize that part of the reason for US primacy or hegemony had to do with not only US national strength, but how the US built world order. To him, primacy, dominance, and greatness relies on national power. But for American traditional liberal order, the assumption is that power is only one element. It's not the direct exercise of power, but how you build world order to bring others into the system and give them a stake in the system. And he doesn't recognize the importance of that because the foundation of that order is US alliances, multilateral institutions, and trade. And he has challenged all of them. So in making America great again, he might actually destroy the liberal order. And in that sense, a key basis of America's greatness. So we will see. Again, I will not make any prediction of how far he will carry out. There are a lot of issues here. Is he going to really undermine NATO? Is he going to really undermine the US-Japan alliance, forcing them to pay more? Japanese probably will pay, but we'll see. Is he going to move away from the multilateral institutions and go more bilateral, more one-to-one in terms of trade, which will also be damaging to the liberal order? He's not going to care about ideology, which may be a good thing, and that's one part the Chinese like. Trump is not going to promote democracy. But what impact it will have on US credibility and an aspect of the liberal order. So in my view, the liberal order is in crisis, and the liberal order being synonymous, in my view, the way I use it, with the American world order, which is the title of my book. And was already eroded for the last 20 years or so, and mainly from external factors, but now the external factors are linked up into the domestic politics of the US, and we have a person who is going to make probably it a lot worse. But at the same time, should we be very pessimistic? You know, it's pretty hard to be optimistic these days. It's a pretty dark situation, although there are a lot of Trump supporters who think the good days are ahead and it's coming, but certainly I'm a very optimistic person generally in life, and I can't be too optimistic. But this is, by the way, I wanted to talk a little bit about it. You talk about globalization being over or in crisis, not for India and China. So when you talk about, just before the election, the Pew 2016 Global Attitude Survey, so ask the question whether involvement in global economy is good. 60% of Chinese agree, 52% Indians agree, 56 Europeans agree, and 44 Americans agree. But children will be better off than their parents. 72% of Indians agree, 82% of Chinese agree. This is optimism, by the way. And their nation plays a more important role in the world than 10 years ago. 68% Indians agree, 75% of Chinese agree. Now, leaving aside issues with the polls, but generally, countries like China and India have benefited a lot from the current world order and from globalization. They're not going to go back on this. And this is why Xi Jinping went to Davos and made a speech saying that China is committed to globalization. And I think, and the Indians, there is a limit to which China and India can do to sustain it, but they can do a lot because of the nature of the global power shift. And my article in the Financial Times came out on the 19th of January, just a few days after Xi Jinping's speech, basically makes that point, that the emerging powers, actually, if they play the cards, they're not going to destroy the global order as they were supposed to do, they will actually defend it. And so the roles have been reversed, whereas the countries which created the liberal order, they actually are destroying it. Okay, so to conclude, nobody makes a prediction, but these are the patterns that are emerging. I don't call it a multipolar world, because multipolarity is a very outdated European notion. I call it a multiplex world. The world order is going to be more pluralistic, like a multiplex cinema, which the audience have more choice of actors, producers, directors, and plots, and not just Hollywood, but also Bollywood. And you can, you can have multiplex outside, go to a multiplex theater. You can also have streaming at home. We have a domestic multiplex. You can see a choice of movies. So we're not limited to seeing only one movie at a time, as is a Hollywood movie or a Western ideology, Western actors. We have a greater choice and variety. But really, the real point is that there's no return to traditional multipolarity as Europe before World War II, because that world had no real institutions, very little trade, but basically, Europe was interdependent within itself. The rest of the world was dependent on Europe, colonialism. We don't have that situation. The world is today genuinely interdependent. And it's not just about trade, it's also investment, finance, production networks, supply chains, and the like. I don't think there will be a global hegemon ever again. Global hegemony is very rare. The Roman Empire was not a global hegemon. The Han Empire was not a global hegemon. They were regional hegemons. The only global hegemons in the history of the world were Britain and then the United States. But that's a very rare phenomenon in history. We'll never have that situation again. And so we will have a world of multiple great powers, but with complex interdependence, unlike Europe before World War II. Complex global interdependence will mark the relationship. We'll have persisting cultural and political diversity rather than end of history. Global governance is going to be more fragmented. There will be a shift from post-war big multilaterals led by the UN system to new forms like the Asian Infrastructure Development Bank, Gates Foundation, which is, by the way, spends more money on global public health than WHO does, public-private partnerships, and regionalisms, which are also very, very important, like the ASEAN economic community. And also, I won't count out European Union either. So I will leave it to you here. Again, these are not my predictions, but this is where the world order is moving, and this is where Trump fits in. So it depends on how his policies pan out. He could learn from early mistakes. George W. Bush started with a lot of rhetoric about unilateralism invading Iraq, but he quickly learned that the world is much more complex, and in his second term, he was pretty kind of a normal American president. The neocon ideology was gone. Maybe Trump will learn that. Or he could continue Trump being Trump and destroy us all. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm not sure at the end of the talk whether you're feeling more optimistic or less optimistic. But anyway, I'm glad that you put the Trump phenomenon in a much larger historical framework. I think that's very important to emphasize, that this shift of power to the east is a very slow and steady long-term trend, and Trump or no Trump will carry on, you know. But when you say that the globalization will no longer be led by the West, the challenge we face is that all the major multilateral institutions, especially the IMF and the World Bank, are still led by the West. As you know, to become the head of the IMF, you must be a European. To become the head of the World Bank, you must be an American, and no Asian qualifies so far. So how do you foresee changes happening in that sphere?
Well, that's part of what I was talking about in the fragmentation of global governance. So the book that is on sale, Cambridge University Press, we brought together 10 of the best minds on globalization and global governance, and covering 9 issue areas, including trade, finance, global health. Yeah. So, and these are experts in areas, and top experts in areas: conflict and security, human rights, atrocity crimes, and climate change, and also cyberspace, refugees. And the common pattern that emerges is that there is a decline of the primacy or the salience of the big multilaterals, of the UN system. And a lot of other different types of, different forms of mechanisms of governance are coming up. And they're not necessarily from the emerging powers. They're also from NGOs, they're from private foundations. But it's all tinkering away with the traditional architecture of global governance. In areas like finance, which is still very traditional, so IMF still has a role, but it also find new financial mechanisms like the Tsinghua initiative coming up. In trade and development, certainly with the new development bank of the BRICS, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, they're taking up a slack that the World Bank and the ADB. You forgot about ADB. ADB is always led by a Japanese, and one has to wonder why. Asian Development Bank. So this has to. So they're. I'm not saying that disappear. They will be joined by these parallel institutions, and they will have to compromise. They have to come to terms with each other. Some reform has to happen. One of the reasons why China proposed the AIIB was also dissatisfaction with these kind of things. Why should always an American be World Bank president and a French will be the IMF head of IMF. So I think some of that will happen. It's going to take some time, and some of that will happen outside global institutions. Regional institutions will play a role, and there's a trend towards regionalism. And I'm not talking about just ASEAN type of regionalism, but also, it is quite possible that Trump will have his own vision of trade arrangements, preferential trade arrangements. He could do it bilaterally. He could also have his own TPP. You know, don't count that out. He just didn't like Obama's TPP, but there could be a Trump TPP where he can have more favorable terms for the United States. But fragmentation, that's what I call it, of global governance is happening. And this is, climate change is another great example because there is no global climate institution. And climate change is a very important area where all these public-private partnerships, hybrid institutions, NGOs are coming into play. And this is what adds to the complexity of the world. So we would see either reform of the existing institutions or obsolescence.
Okay, questions from the floor. Yes, please. Yeah. If you don't mind, just go to the microphone. Yeah.
Good evening, Professor. My name is Tsing. At the start of this presentation, right, you mentioned that how Trump is very unpredictable. I also read from a lot of writers and all that. They say that they also mentioned that Trump is very unpredictable, and I'm not very
unpredictable. Is
yeah,
that?
Unpredictable. Yeah. So I'm not very convinced with this way of phrasing it. So I was just thinking in a way that to figure out how we can better predict Trump, right? I was just wondering what's your opinion on why did Trump run for presidency in the first place? Yeah.
Okay. The very short answer is that he came to a White House annual White House press dinner, and Obama humiliated him, and he wanted to go back and run for presidency.
You know, it was the annual press dinner.
White House, the annual White House press dinner, where Trump went and Obama made fun of him, and he felt insulted. A lot of people think that was his main reason, but so other people say.
So the lesson is never humiliate Donald Trump.
He wanted to promote his brand, increase the value of his assets. But I think the truth could well be that he sensed an opportunity, a growing sense of dissatisfaction among a section of the American population who have lost out in globalization, and he exploited their instincts, including anti-immigrant, anti-globalization instincts, and he took the opportunity by hand. So that could be, but it could be a combination of all the factors. Because I really don't know, because I've never met Mr. Trump, and although he's going to live in Washington now, and we are thinking of moving our house a little further away. But Obama was a good neighbor. His daughter came to our neighborhood to study in Sidwell Primary School. And so when day before the election, I tweeted, I said, everybody wants a good neighbor. Obama was a good neighbor, and Trump is a bully. I tweeted hoping that Trump will never win, but that's on record. So we don't know. I really cannot tell you the personal motivation. Books is going to be written about it, but what I've heard is that he has a very personal sense of being slighted. And he met Richard Branson, Sir Richard Branson, at a lunch, and Richard Branson wrote about this, that he had never met a more vindictive person who takes things so personally as Trump. So it could be personal, it could be opportunity, business opportunity, it could be political opportunity, taking advantage of dissatisfaction, all of the above.
Okay. There's a gentleman here, and then I'll go to you and then come to you. Okay, yes. Please, yeah, okay, go ahead.
Sorry. Wai Ming, I'm a practicing lawyer. Just interesting to know in your multiplex world, where the small nations like Singapore have to play. Are we going to be an actor? Are we just going to be an audience?
Yeah, I have said this in my other writings. Actually, it gives small nations more opportunity for projecting their voice, but that was before Trump. Okay. Within the multiplex world that was already unfolding, small and middle powers actually have greater opportunity, because it's not a world dominated by one single hegemon, and it's not a world, it's a more decentered world. So you can actually pick your comparative advantage and run with it. So the traditional, by the way, European history. The history of Europe is a history dominated by a handful of great powers. So Britain and Prussia, then unified Germany, Russia, and France, and at various points Spain, and the like. What happened to countries like Poland? They're always in the receiving end. So multipolarity was never good for small countries. They were always in the receiving end. Bipolarity also gave the two superpowers, the biggest control, biggest was leverage. So a multiplex world is so complex, so messy, that if a small country can play its cards well and have a very focused policy, which Singapore has, it actually can go very far. But I think we have to reserve our judgment on this, because we don't know where this is going to the existing world, or how quickly it will unfold, it will sort of unravel, and in what way, because I would be in a position to answer that next year. So we have to give Mr. Trump a year to destroy the world. So I think it's too early. But I would think that if he didn't do too much damage, there actually could be something good about it. Because liberalism was also a little hyper. And one of the reasons why Democrats lost, and the East Coast liberals and the California liberals, because they were hyping my book, by the way, was a critique of the liberal internationalism rhetoric of the Obama period. And it was basically, there was too much self-congratulation. America did all these great things about the world, overlooking all the abuses and failures of the United States foreign policy. And if Trump can actually put a reality check on them, and then Trump, of course, hopefully loses in 4 years. That's my personal view. I fully appreciate that some of you want him to stay on. So then actually the Democrats will have a different kind of leadership, and maybe more realistic. And they can actually rebuild and revive the world order. But it's too early to say, really.
The next question, please. Yeah.
Hi, okay, I have two questions. Firstly, because development is defined largely by the West and also funded largely by the West, how do you think the definition of development will change with the East leading development? And my second question is with regards to his recent executive order. What do you think is the U.S. obligation to the world?
Because of the immigration order,
yeah.
Executive order, yeah. So I think the definition of development was slightly changing, and this was also because of the work of actually Asians. So when you talk about global shift, we talk about power shift, but some of us have argued that there is also an idea shift happening. So not just a power shift, but idea shift. So there are a lot of new concepts of development, finance, environmental protection coming from the non-Western world. So development, the idea of human development, which is the Human Development Index is the result of that, was pioneered by an Indian and a Pakistani, or a Pakistani first and an Indian next. So Mahbubul Haq and Amartya Sen. Their idea is that development should not be measured just by GDP alone, but also by overall development. And that's really a revolutionary idea, which is actually catching on. I also think developing infrastructure, education will take priority over simply adding to your GDP through trade. And that was already happening in some ways. But I'm not a development expert. I cannot predict all the ways development will change. But I think sustainable development, which, again, a lot of these ideas came from also Africa. Wangari Maathai, who passed away in 2011, but whose daughter I interviewed for an article I was writing about idea shift. You can read this article called Idea Shift in Third World Quarterly. It talks about a whole variety of new ideas that have come actually from the West, from the rest. The West no longer has the monopoly of the best ideas. And these ideas are making difference. Responsible sovereignty, which is the basis of R2P, is really an African contribution. Francis Deng, Kofi Annan, before the Australian Gareth Evans and the Canadians actually took over the idea. So that'll be my first answer. The second answer is, sorry, your question was, can you repeat that?
Sure. With regards to his recent executive order, what's the United States obligation to
really,
the world?
it's a huge mess. I mean, every 10 minutes we get emails, because we are all, universities are in a panic about this order, because many universities have students from these countries, and some of them have been out They can't come back, and some of them are already in employment. Even the executive order is supposed to exclude people having green cards, but some people with green cards are being detained and returned back at the airport. So this is real chaos. And this is going to have, this doesn't reflect on the liberal values of the West. But the gratifying thing is that many Americans have protested. The airports have been full of protests. Universities, the University of Indiana president came up with a very strong statement condemning it, and that created a template. So my university president just came up with a statement yesterday condemning it. The International Studies Association, where I was president, just came out with a statement because we're having a convention in Baltimore in 3 weeks, and many of our participants can't come. So we are thinking of moving our conference to Canada, because Canada's Trudeau actually has welcomed. He has slapped basically Trump by saying that all these people are welcome in Canada. But the problem is that some of the people are already in the United States from these countries. If they travel to Canada, they won't be able to come back. So it's a real mess. We'll see in 3 months. But there are court challenges as well. Some courts have issued stay orders. And I hope the courts will finally sort of negate that order, but I cannot tell you.
Thank you.
Okay, next question here, please.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the talk. My name is Amaya, and I work for UN Women here in Singapore. In recent days, a lot has been said about the fact that the US is no longer a democracy, especially given the firing of the Attorney General just yesterday or the day before. And we've also seen the rise of far-right movements in Europe. So I was wondering if you could say something about the role of democracy. Is democracy over in the West, in the world? And also remark on totalitarianism and fascism, given history and how you see that panning out in the future.
I want Kishore to answer this question. Really, seriously.
No, I mean, I wouldn't say that democracy is over, but it's very clear that, the whole, I'm glad you mentioned the end of history thesis, right? The end of the Cold War. The spirit that was captured brilliantly in Francis Fukuyama's essay, The End of History, was that essentially mankind has been evolving for millennia, and now we finally reached the final destination, which is we all going to become liberal democracies, and there's no other option. And once you choose liberal democracy, you hit nirvana, right? And I don't know whether now you read some of Francis Fukuyama's recent essays. He's actually acknowledged that he made a big mistake with the end of history thesis. He's acknowledged that it's not so simple. And frankly, what the big change that is happening with Donald Trump is that there's a lot more questioning going on about whether or not, these forms of democracy are the best way to govern yourselves. I mean, no one has quite yet figured out the better alternative. But whereas in the 1990s, there was in a sense, a strong global push, pushing countries towards more and more democracy in a faster and faster pace. Today, I think everybody is being very careful and very cautious about political evolution. And to take the elephant in the room, which of course is China, the emerging power, I would say even 10, 20 years ago among Chinese intellectuals, there was a sense, a desire to flirt with democracy and to see whether it could be transplanted to China. But now, frankly, after Trump, many Chinese are quite relieved that they have Xi Jinping instead of Donald Trump as their leader. So it is obviously changing the global chemistry, but I agree with Amitav, it's still too early to judge Donald Trump. I mean, he's only been in office for 10 days. So let's see what happens after 10 months and after a year or two. But you're right in suggesting that it's changed the whole global discourse on democracy.
And I want to add something. Democracy is also not a question of simple elections. It's also a question of liberal values. And you have a president, of the leader of the free world, who has taken a position which the Speaker of the House of Representatives have said, a textbook case of racism. Okay, that's Paul Ryan's statement. I'm not inventing it. You have statements against women, statements against minority, Mexicans are rapists. Now, if a democracy elects a person of this quality, that gives democracy a bad name. And the China Daily in an editorial, and I've quoted that in my Yale Global article that might have been circulated recently, that China said Trump gives democracy a bad name. And I don't know that the China Daily was saying that with regret or with glee, but it certainly can be the finest hour of democracy. And many people have compared the rise of Trump with the rise of Hitler, the rise of fascism in Europe, and that's also a concern, because there are many leaders who will get encouragement from Trump's election. So even those, including myself, who like to think that democracy is not perfect, but it's still probably better than any other system, and I may be that's my personal view, we're very, we have to re-examine our views, because this is, if this is the result of democracy, there's something wrong. But I do think that this is a problem with the American electoral system. I really feel that under a parliamentary system in Britain, Trump would not have been elected, because it's very easy to replace the leader of a British parliamentary party than the nominee of a major American political party. There was a time when a lot of Republicans wanted to replace Trump, but they couldn't do that. But this would have happened very quickly in the British system. So this may be the problem of a particular form of democracy, but that's being very optimistic about democracy. This is not a great moment for democracy.
Okay, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Joshua Green. I'm a visiting professor at SMU. I have a question regarding Germany and the Eurozone. You may have seen that in this morning's Financial Times, Trump's advisor, Peter Navarro, launched a big attack on Germany, claiming that first, the euro is basically a German currency, and that secondly, Germany has been forcing down the value of the euro. Now, a number of economists have argued that within the Eurozone, Germany, I don't know if taking advantage is the right word, but by pursuing tight monetary and fiscal policy, and therefore obtaining a rather strong external position, a big trade surplus and so on, Germany has made it very hard for other countries in the Eurozone, in particular places like Greece and Portugal. So a question that I'd ask is whether you see a potential as a result of this latest attack on Germany for some kind of rebalancing within the Eurozone. In other words, is there anything, could there be something positive out of what looks like a rather negative development? Thank you.
I have to confess that this is a little beyond my area of expertise, especially the currency financial problems in the Eurozone. But I have heard that criticism that you are making of Germany from others, that Germany has not been sensitive enough to the economic situation of the Mediterranean European countries. And this is really all Germany's fault that we have that. So to that extent, you may well be right, but really this is a little beyond my area of expertise to give a really thoughtful, meaningful answer. So unless you want to add something.
No, I think when it comes to currencies, I stay out of. But there's actually the larger political question as to whether or not, as a result of the Eurozone, is Germany benefiting at the expense of Italy and Greece and so on and so forth. So you can actually make a case that the Germans have benefited a lot from the low value of the euro. It's enhanced the German export machine. That's why the German economy is doing very well. But it's punished the other countries and so on and so forth. But probably will have to be some kind of renegotiation within the Eurozone, but it will have to wait for after Brexit, I think. All the energies of the European leaders will be focused on Brexit for 2 years. It's a massive exercise, but after that there will be the second reckoning, and the second reckoning will be on the Eurozone, I think. That's my guess.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Dr. Acharya. Blake Berg with the Center on Asia and Globalization. We talk about Trump, but we talk about him as a single actor in American politics and not so much on the institution itself. So my question is whether do you think that the American institutions themselves, the executive branch, the judiciary, the legislative branch, are actually resilient enough to withstand the challenge he represents to them? And do you think that American norms will change as a result of the Trump presidency? Or do you see them as the American population doubling down on American values as a result of the changes that he's kind of put in place?
Well, the first thing I would say is that this has also something to do with the electoral college system, and and a lot of people are paying attention. That it's not going to be easy to change that. A constitutional amendment in the United States is next to an impossible thing. So the electoral college system can create this situation when you have Hillary Clinton more than 2 million votes in general popular vote, with Trump winning the electoral college. In terms of the judiciary, I must say that I find the American judiciary, I would much prefer, because I grew up in India maybe, in the British system, the British judiciary is a lot less political and than the American judiciary. The American judiciary is very political. I mean, especially the way the judges are appointed, elected, and they play politics all the time compared to the British counterpart. So, but we are not going to be able to change that. The most important thing is norms. And I think, I am still hopeful that the majority of the Americans would defend the traditional values, and this cuts across Republicans and Democrats. We have a lot of Republicans who could have been president. I mean, Jeb Bush and others. They do imbibe on the basic American values. What Mr. Trump represents is not seen by a lot of Americans. Not just me, a lot of as reflecting American values. Elliot Cohen has come up with a op-ed in the Atlantic. He was part of the neoconservative group under George W. Bush, and he said that Trump has done the most damage to American liberal values. 2 days ago, Bob Cohen, you know that, my predecessor, one of my predecessors, ISA president, our association issued a statement which was considered very tame. And Cohen organized a signature campaign. And when I landed in Singapore at 4 a.m. in the morning, I had an email, sign this petition, because Bob Cohen basically charted how this is the single greatest assault on American values since the internment of Japanese during the Second World War. And he goes on, he's a political scientist, goes on detailing. So we actually changed our statement and made it much stronger on the ISA. So there are people, that gives you hope. That even though the electoral college produced the result that we have when somebody who won 2 million votes in popular vote lost the presidency, but the people ultimately will, the tide will turn. But don't count on it, because we have a situation where both the houses of the Congress are under Republican hands. Trump is going to be able to appoint a judge very quickly, I mean, if not the next few weeks, and that will tilt the balance. The Supreme Court, which is a very political institution. So I must say that I am not very optimistic about American institutions. I think the United States had a great ride for 200 years because of a combination of circumstances. Europe was declining, US was rising, geographic isolation, getting the wealth of the American continent, the free land, manifest destiny, and all that. And that prosperity, that opportunity, and the geographic location allowed America to function with these institutions. But now we are in a much more complex world, and where challenges are, the United States basically rose when the East was down. The rise of the United States coincided with the decline of China and India and other countries. Now the United States is in a real competitive situation. This is structural. This is beyond Trump's what do you call a pay. Trump is going to probably take, he said $1 or not, no salary. He is not going to be able to reverse this long-term structural decline. That is why I wanted to focus on the long-term structural factors. And those factors do not favor American institutions. Unlike a lot of Americans who have a lot of faith in the institutions, somehow there'll be checks and balances. We have seen the checks and balances system dysfunctional. helping U.S. to address these problems of globalization. The checks and balances hasn't worked. So maybe the rise of the United States was a fluke, great historical fluke. Sorry.
Okay,
that's going to the extreme.
Yeah, we are running out of time. So why don't we take the last 3 questions, and
Yeah.
if you don't mind, we start with you together, and you can write down, take them down if you want.
Greetings, professors. My name is Mitesh Narayan from Millennia Institute. And my question to you today will be, given President Trump's rising distance from the Chinese, is it possible that President Trump is increasing his bilateral ties with Prime Minister Modi and India instead?
Okay, that's all the questions?
Yeah. Go ahead. Next question, please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Perlin. I have a couple of questions. First of all, I would like to know a little bit about, there was some debate about whether Sally Yates and the US State Department, whether their protest is actually in line with the role that they're supposed to play and whether they have overreached. And the second thing that I was kind of curious about is actually, okay, do I get one more question? Whether Trump and his Lieutenant Steve Bannon, whether they have other plans, because there was a very interesting post by this political historian who was talking about how Steve Bannon is actually just baiting the public so that they can slip in other people into the Security Council. Yeah.
So can you just tell what is the question then?
No, whether, because I would like your thoughts on, there was this post by this political historian from a US university. She was talking about how Trump, she thinks that Steve Bannon is playing a game in which they are creating a big fuss at one side and then trying to do other things.
Steve Bannon.
Or distraction,
That's right.
yeah, they're creating a
Yes,
distraction, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
it was
okay.
a very, more or less a viral post already. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Last question, quick. It's your second question, right?
Hi, good evening. Actually, it's not a question, but I have a comment to share. So I was wondering if it's convenient to share it.
Quickly, if you don't mind, we're running out of time.
Because the professor, you mentioned the liberal order to me in a way that it's almost like a de facto to how where the world is going. I feel that the fact that the Western countries are advancing the liberal order is like to sort of get that moral high ground over other countries, which was quite crucial during a time of colonialization. But I think the problem at our age is that the Western countries sort of prioritize that as a factor of good governance over economy and people. So in terms of, if we can frame it like in a Maslow hierarchy, right? They're not settling the things that are more fundamental, but they are already doing the things that is one step above. So I feel that one way that Trump could be good for America is that by putting America first in his own terms, he's putting this idea of advancing liberal order to the world as something of a secondary issue, but to settle the basics of their Maslow hierarchy. And I think it's something essential for a lot of Western countries. Perhaps what makes Asia perform so well right now is that we focus on the fundamentals and not jump straight to the second level. So that's just something I want to share. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the first question is about Trump and India.
Yeah, let me take that and you take the other ones. Okay.
Oh.
I think Trump and India is a complex relationship, and again, the jury is out on that one. There were a lot of Indians in the United States which actually supported Trump, and Trump actually visited Indian temple during the election campaign, and there is some people think he will get along well with Modi. Modi was among the first to congratulate him. But then Trump also made a call to Pakistan prime minister and then got Indians upset. So it's really too early to say where he's going to play. He's certainly not going to like India because India is a democracy. That's not going to be his calculation. He would probably want to use India if he really gets into a confrontation situation with China. He will certainly expect India to be part of his agenda, and I think India will resist that, but we will see what happens. So I think some people also say Mr. Modi has authoritarian tendencies and he will be happy to see Trump elected as part of the global rise of authoritarianism. But again, Modi is a democratically elected leader, and he also is subject to checks and balances. He may not get re-elected after the first term. Anything is possible in Indian politics. But I generally think that Trump has taken a softer line on India than it has taken on China. Okay, so that's the only clue I can get. One of the people who is being mentioned as the U.S. ambassador to India is a friend of mine, Ashley Tellis, who you know very well, Ashley. And he actually has come up with a statement that Trump should continue with Obama's policy towards India. And if he gets to be an ambassador, if Trump trusts him, maybe the relationships will be good. But that's all I can say. Sure.
I notice you give me the easier questions.
Steve,
okay, very, very quickly. The first one about the protests by Yates and the State Department and all that. I mean, this is actually related to the question about how strong are American institutions? Can they handle Trump? And actually, I want to, since I had criticized Francis Fukuyama earlier, actually I just read an essay that Francis Fukuyama published 2-3 days ago. You can Google and get it. Yeah. And he says actually the Trump presidency will be the biggest test ever for American institutions. And we will now find out whether or not they are as strong as they are reported to be. So he thinks we may actually discover that they're not as strong as you thought that they were. But you can read his essay, he gives a very careful, very nuanced reply. But certainly the Trump presidency is going to shake up the American institutional and political order. But the second question, you're absolutely right. Whoever wrote that blog post about Trump and Bannon, about how they try to distract you. In fact, I met somebody in Davos who said to me, let me give you a simple way of analyzing the tweets of Trump. If he tweets on something, right? Let's say if he tweets on some, let's say, women issue, immediately ask yourself, what else is happening that he doesn't want you to pay attention to? So he tweets on something knowing that the media will go all after that tweet and they will forget what he doesn't want them to see. So he's been very clever in the way that he's done his tweets and all. The liberal media tries to portray him as being wild and reckless, but actually he's been quite clever in the way he's managed everything. By the end of the day, just to conclude, I think I completely agree with Amitav. It's a bit too early to decide what Trump will do, how bad he will be, whether or not he can actually redeem himself. All the omens so far are very bad. But you never know, right? He may turn around, American institutions may rise up, the world may protest, organizations may protest, things may change. But we're still very early to tell, but I'm really glad that Amitav came here to our school to address a very, very difficult topic, and one that I'm confident we'll be discussing intensively for the next 4 years, assuming he survives 4 years. So with that, please join me in thanking Amitav.